What are you telling me, Mandem? Ever been styling a button and it looks good on your laptop, but mad small on your phone? Or try to center something and it just ain't looking right? That CSS value is doing you dirty. Now you see developers throwing around stuff like 10VW, calc, rem, and you're thinking, what's all that about then? Well, today we're breaking it all down. CSS values and units are like the ingredients in your recipes. Get them wrong and your whole layout's going to be peak. Now get them right and you're cooking proper professional styles that work everywhere. Now over the next 2 videos, I'm going to show you everything you need to know about CSS values and units. Now today we're covering the foundations, the core measurement concepts that will sort out 90% of your layout problems. Now let's get into it. All right, so in CSS, every property needs a value. So let's have a look at this commented out example that I have here. So we have H1 with the value of red for the color, 10 pixels for the margin, and 2M for the font size. So everything on the right of the colon is the value. Each of those bits after the colon is a value. So we got red, 10 pixels, and 2M. But here's the thing, CSS values come in different types, and knowing which type to use when is absolutely key. When you look at the CSS docs, you'll see value types written with angle brackets, for example, like this. And let's say for color or for length, just like this. Now that's just telling you what kind of value that property can take. Now, CSS is really strict about what values work where. You can't just throw a color where length is needed or a string where a number should be. Each property has rules about what values it accepts. So we can see here, red in terms of color value is appropriate. However, if you were to try to do something like this where color equals 20 pixels, that wouldn't work. I'll just uncomment this. Now, some CSS properties just take plain numbers with no units. So let's have a look at this numbers and length section that we have here. So we have opacity as 0.5 and the Z index as 10. Now, let's say if we were to change the opacity to 0.9. So we've got the opacity here as 0.5 and the Z index as... Now, absolute units are fixed and they don't change based on anything else. But the real power is in relative units that change based on other factors. So let's have a look. Where is it? I think I just went past it. So here, yeah. So we have this percentage box here with a width of 80%. So that's 80% of the parent's element's width. Now we have here font size of 1.5 rem, which is relative to the root element font size. Now 2M, which is relevant to the element's font size. So we've got this 5VW, which is 5 viewport width units. And then lastly, we've got this 50 VH, so 50 viewport height units. Now, let me show you how it works with a practical example. Now, we have this first box that is 200 pixel wide, and it will always stay 200 pixels wide no matter what. Now, we've also got this, which is 50% wide, which is currently at 300 pixels, and we have this at 20 EM wide. Now, if we could see, the first example always stays at 200 pixel wide. However, we could see the yellow, the middle box changing because of its parent's width changing. So if I make it a lot smaller, it still stays at 50% of the parent element's width. Now, yeah, I'd say for font sizes, I would usually use rem, and I'd say it's usually better than M. Now with M, sizes can compound when elements are nested, and you might end up with massive text by accident. So rem always refers to the root element's font size, so it's way more predictable. So we can see here, we've got the width for this first box as 200 pixel. We've got 1 inch for this second box and 0.5 centimeters. Now these two are more for prints and you rarely see that. I'll say pixels are what you would use probably more than 90% of the time for absolute measurements. But the real power is in relative units that change based on other factors. Now some CSS properties work best with no units at all. So a good example of this is line height. And it's really important for readable text. Now, when you use it without units, it multiplies the font size. So if this text has a line height of 1.5, and let's say your font is 16 pixels, the line height then becomes 24 pixels, which is 1.5 of 16. Now, this scales perfectly when font sizes change. And it's much better than hard coding pixel value. Now let's move on to percentages. Now this is where things get a little bit tricky because percentages are always relative to something else, but what they're relative to isn't always obvious. So let's see here, we've got this width percentage, which is 50%. Now that's 50% of the parent's width. Now if we go to the margin top of 10%, now this is 10% of the containing block's width, not height. And then lastly, the font size percentage. So 120%, that is 120% of the parent's font size. Now here's the crazy thing about percentages. What they're based on depends entirely on the property. So you can see here, width and height is based on the parent's dimensions. Margin and padding based on the containing block's width. Font size is based on the parent's font size, and transform is based on the element's own dimensions. Now I'll say the tricky one is definitely the margin. So you definitely have a look at the CSS docs to make sure you're familiar with what the percentages are affecting based on the property. All right, guys, now that's the foundation sorted. Now today we've covered CSS values and why the browser is strict about them, numbers and lengths, so absolute versus relative units and when to use each one, unitless values, like line height, that scale, percentages, and their tricky reference points based on what property it is. Now, these are your core measurement tools for CSS. Now, master these and you'll understand how sizing works. No more guessing why elements aren't the size that you expected. Now, in the next video, in the part 2 of this, we're diving into the visual side. So colors, advanced functions, and some real-world examples. I'll show you all the different ways to define colors, the game-changing calc function, and how to put it all together in actual responsive layouts. Now, drop a like if you found that useful, and if you haven't watched my previous videos or the last one, which is handling conflicts, you could watch that right here. And if you've got any questions, just drop them in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.